I will started recording, and I'll send out an email maybe with a reminder to that effect for anyone who might have missed it. I don't want folks to show up on Tuesday and wonder what's happening. So that is what I needed you to be aware of in terms of the exam though. And then I do want to show you really quickly the exam one study guide, just so that you can quickly look over these concepts and ask me any questions about things that you may not understand at this point. So we're looking at chapters 1 through 4. We've discussed 1 through 3 so far, and we will spend our time today focusing on chapter 4. And so the last couple of items on the list, cohabitating, palimony, singlehood, that's content from today. But everything else, so we talked about those theoretical frameworks for understanding relationships. I will refer you back to that group grid assignment that we did in breakout sessions. Look back on those and make sure that you understand the practical or real life applications of how those frameworks help us understand relationships. Polyamory, the idea of multiple loves and some concepts related to that. We talked about Sternberg's triangular theory of love, or view of love. There are 3 components there, and there's a PDF handout on the course page that can help you take a deeper look at that. We talked about types of love, eros, mania, storge, all those different types of love. You guys did your own work around the love languages idea, so some familiarity with that. And then last time we met, we talked about gender and diversity, and you did some work in your breakout groups to look at key definitions and some theories and theoretical frameworks that help us understand gender and diversity and the role that it plays in things like mate selection and such. Any questions, burning concerns about test 1? Okay. I will take the silence to mean that everyone is in good shape and feeling okay about that. And we will move into the content for today, which is, as I said, about singlehood and some related issues in singlehood, cohabitation, what that looks like, what are some of the advantages, disadvantages. And then we're also going to talk about sort of a unique relationship. We'll talk about some trends that are more millennial, Gen Z type of trends, in particular, the delay of marriage. So we'll think about kind of why that's happening, this notion of hanging out and hooking up, and then long distance relationships and these sort of unique, the book calls them LAT relationships, which is an acronym for living apart together. So we're seeing more and more couples in committed relationships, long-term, even marriages, that choose to live in separate domiciles, and people have their own reasons for that. But for a lot of folks in a lot of relationships, it is a real positive, and it's a thing that we're seeing more and more of in today's society. So we'll talk about all of these things in a little bit more detail. First and foremost, I want to touch on singlehood. When we think about singles, I think generally speaking, we think about young people who have not ever been married. So that's the first type, this sort of never married single. But people who have been divorced and or widowed are also, defined as singles. They're just not the most commonly thought of in terms of singlehood, but there are those 3 key types of singles. Does anyone remember from the reading, what is this idea of sologamy as it relates to singleism or singlehood?
It's just like marrying yourself.
Yes. So there is, and I don't know how common this is. I don't think our text spoke to that. But there is a a civil union with oneself. And so I think the book gave an example of, a female individual who was sort of tired and put out with having to explain her decision to stay single, and, answering all the questions. So we have a lot of stereotypes about people who stay single, and we'll talk about some of those today. But because she, was sort of frustrated with that element of society, she actually married herself in a civil ceremony. And, I guess at that point was no longer technically single, because she had committed to, that partnership or marriage with herself. So a term to be aware of, sologamy. Again, I don't know how common it is, but just know that it is a thing. And so I want to use the chat feature for just a few minutes. After we do this, I'll have you type your names in also for attendance purposes, but take a couple of minutes and think about the idea of people delaying marriage in today's society. So that's a common trend. Why do you think, what are some of the reasons that you think that might be happening? Why are people waiting until later in life to get married? Freedom, fear of divorce, career establishment, school career. Madison, I don't know if you're still on the call, but you may want to hop off and try to get back on. I think sound function is good for everyone else, I hope. Work, school career, people are in school for longer. Someone said COVID. Money, career, early commitment, probably related to all of these things. The need for financial stability. So a lot of common themes coming out here. The change in women's role in society. Would you be willing to speak to that?
I don't know who said that, but I said something similar. I said more women are going to school longer, and so you want to like finish school before you get married, and so that's a difference, because if women weren't going to school as longer, then they had nothing else to do, like they might as well get married. So that could definitely be a reason.
Yeah, I think that, and probably women are pursuing more specific career paths and things like that nowadays, that the trend is not necessarily to get married and be a homemaker. And so I think that's probably a real clear shift. Also, someone said not needing the legality. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about this idea of seeing really negative outcomes with marriage relationships in other family members, and the desire to kind of avoid those troubles by not getting married. So yeah, I think these are all valid reasons that we are seeing this happen. There's actually, when my undergraduate was in psychology, and the lifespan development perspective, we used to look at phases of development like infancy, toddlerhood, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and somewhere in the last 10 to 15 years, they have actually added a bracket in there called extended adolescence. And so obviously that's happening after adolescence, and this extended adolescence is the period before true adulthood, right? Which is when we're probably in our early 20s, we're still in college or grad school. We're not quite living that, to the extent, we're not married and having a family. Most of us are adulting by the time we're 23 or so. But it's not quite the same phase of life as what adulthood used to look like. So there has been a shift, in terms of how society views the early 20s and even into the late 20s, because, school that used to take 4 years is now more like 5 or 6. Lots of things that have kind of impacted this, but just something to kind of be aware of is that, lots of elements and aspects of life are happening later nowadays than they used to. And then singleism. Singleism is this idea, I kind of mentioned it before, that we have sort of a negative view, a negative association with people who stay single, indefinitely. It leads to a lot of stereotyping, stigmatizing, and even discrimination. So sometimes workplace policies and procedures hold benefits for people who are in married relationships that they don't extend to folks who are single. You think about, retirement benefits, health insurance, lots of those things are tied to the legal partnership of a marriage for individuals. And so if you stay single, you might not enjoy all the benefits of married people in some ways. And then we'll talk in some ways how you might enjoy different benefits. So, kind of the place where all of this starts, right, is the dating relationship. And we're going to talk about kind of the functionality of dating, and then some shifts that have happened in recent decades around dating and partner involvement. So what's the point of partner involvement, dating other people? First and foremost, we have this idea of confirmation of the social self. If you remember back to the theoretical frameworks that we talked about in like week 1 or 2, this is that notion that someone else's assessment of us, how we think another person thinks about us or feels about us, influences how we think and feel about ourselves. It influences how we behave. It sort of holds up a mirror to us. That's called the symbolic interaction framework. And that helps us confirm our social self. So when we are involved with a partner, this shows up for us in a really clear way through that, our interactions with that one individual. There are also recreational benefits to partner involvement. We have fun together, we hang around, do things, do life. Companionship, intimacy, sex, these all give us a sense of security and connection to one specific person out of the larger social world. There's also this idea of anticipatory socialization. So sometimes we interact or, involve ourselves in relationships with partners just because it provides a context for us to learn how to be in partnership with another person. I might remain in a relationship that I know is not going to result in marriage simply for this purpose, because it gives me the opportunity at this point in time, to practice my skills as a partner in a relationship. And so there can be an element of forward thinking in terms of, partnering with other people. Status achievement. This is related to those stigmas that I mentioned about singleism. Oftentimes, I think kind of society associates marriage with life satisfaction. Sometimes it's, to appease other family members who place high value on marriage, conforming to societal norms. All of these are ways that we see that idea of status achievement show up in our relationships, romantic relationships with others. And then at the very most basic level, mate selection, that is how we reproduce and procreate as a species. And so, we don't normally get to that point without some form of dating involvement with another person. And so seeing someone might eventually lead to, marriage and family reproduction. But those are kind of the 6 main functions of partner involvement. And then some trends that we've seen. So, part of this is that delay of marriage. People are getting married at later ages. So the age of marriage has increased. We've seen a broadening of the dating pool. So again, because there are more people in their 30s unmarried, there are more people available, for dating relationships and marriages. And I also think that technology and media has played a huge part here. So that, when I was in college, Facebook was like invented when I was a freshman in college. And it opened up a whole new world, right? Because no longer did I only have access to the people who were on campus at Appalachian State and in Boone and surrounding areas, but I had access virtually to people at universities. At that time, it was only for university students, universities all over the country. And now, you know, you've got a million different social networking apps and things like that that can connect you to people across the globe. So the dating pool has really become an ocean, if you will. Cohabitation has become more normed. So this is, again, a shift. It used to be very negatively viewed in society. And I think more and more people are recognizing just kind of the functionality and the benefits to cohabitating, you know, either before or in place of marriage. And we'll talk more about that later. More egalitarian gender role relationships. This came up in the chat and in, you know, some of the points that were brought up in terms of women's roles in society and how that plays a part here. And then there's also been a shift towards safer sex practices between both genders. So that's just something, you know, that is important to note, I guess, in terms of dating relationships over time. I probably don't need to define these for you guys. Hooking up, hanging out, pretty straightforward. So hanging out is groups of people, you know, they're spending time together with the intent of just having fun and enjoying recreational time together. A hookup, you know, a sexual encounter between two individuals with no relationship commitment on the table. And then long distance relationships are specifically defined in the text as relationships with partners who are at least 500 miles away. So they do, you know, put a specific distance on it. And again, I think technology plays a big part here. You know, we can stay really connected to people in all parts of the world without being physically close to them to some extent anyway. So cohabitation, I do want to give you some specific definitions around these different types of cohabitators. There are 9 listed in the text, and then we'll kind of talk about the themes or the reasons why these relationships exist. But there are here and now cohabitators. So these are people who are really just having fun in the moment that they're in terms of life, and they're not looking forward to a future with this partner, but they are living together in the here and now. Testers, I'll give you the analogy here. You know, you wouldn't buy a car and drive it off the lot without taking it for a test drive. These are people who likely see themselves as wanting to be in a married or a long-term partnership with another person, and they are testing the waters in terms of, you know, seeing if they can live with this person long-term. In about half of these relationships that were studied in the research, these testers, women tended to be more committed than men, and this actually resulted in lower quality relationships because the women were essentially more invested in the cohabitating relationship and the future of the relationship than the men were. Engaged couples are exactly what they sound like. They're planning to be married, have committed to living together as a step towards that life. These couples tend to report the highest satisfaction levels and also the lowest levels of conflict within their relationships. And these guys in general have the highest quality relationships compared to other cohabitators. So they're kind of already, you know, committed in the way that we would expect a married couple to be committed. And that tends to result in better and more positive outcomes for the relationship. We also have money savers. People in this type of cohabitating relationship really choose it just because it is economically convenient. So researchers have observed that working class individuals tend to do this more quickly than middle class individuals, which has implications for, you know, the future of the relationship as it results to someone's socioeconomic status. So if you jump into things more quickly in a relationship because it's financially advantageous for you, it doesn't always result in positive outcomes. The number 5 and 6, these are related to people who have been in previous relationships, and they're really similar in terms of they're both of not marrying a new partner and cohabitating only with a new partner so that they can draw financial benefits from a previous marriage. Number 5, it's specifically like a retirement pension type of financial benefit. And then number 6 would be specific to alimony, which is pay that, the court system deems appropriate when a couple parts ways for one partner to pay the other. So it's really just about the type of funding that they would be not eligible for if they married a new partner in number 5 and number 6. Number 7, security blankets. The idea here is that some people just need other people around. They don't want to go to bed alone at night. They don't want to live in their house alone. They don't want to eat meals alone. So they cohabitate with someone out of this sort of need to have someone else with them, doing life with them. There are also rebellious cohabitators who might be using cohabitating with a partner as a way to establish independence from their family of origin. Most of the time, excuse me, these people have parents or grandparents who feel very strongly against the cohabitating relationship. And so they use it as a way to assert their autonomy in adulthood and kind of break away from that family of origin. And then marriage nevers. These were mentioned in the chat at the beginning. These are people who, either have concerns about how a marriage will impact the dynamics of their romantic relationship. They maybe fundamentally disagree with the institution of marriage or, some other sort of philosophical or, deep-seated reason why they don't believe in marriage as a way to live. And so they are not ever intending to be married, marriage nevers. And out of this same research, there were 6 themes when they interviewed these long-term cohabitators. These 6 themes emerged. Marriage free. So this relates back to that last category. These people, 38% of the people in this study felt like marriage was unnecessary to their happiness as a couple. I saw someone else put that in the chat here today also, that, they just don't think that it's a necessary legal embarkment for a couple. Risk aversion. This relates to that idea of trying to avoid disastrous marriages that they have witnessed in their own experience. So they choose not to be married and to cohabitate with a partner because they're trying to avoid risk related to marriage. Some people boycott marriage in the same way that I just said about marriage nevers, because they think that it's like a governmental institution for heterosexual couples only. And it sometimes is related to their stance as an ally, or maybe from a real, feminist perspective, which also leads into number 4, sexism dissent. This is that rejection of marriage as a connection to the patriarchy, men controlling women. Those are sort of interrelated, boycotting marriage, and then possibly for, feminist sexism reasons. The American dreamer, this theme came out in our chat as well. So these are people who are trying to pay off student loans, establish a career, feel stability in terms of, life path, finances, all of those things before they get married. So they're cohabitating with someone during this process of trying to seek out or live out the American dream. And they're, waiting for marriage. And then some people are trying to avoid economic disincentives. So, I mentioned like the pension partners and the alimony maintenance. That's a way of looking at this, but also we might think of people who, so if I'm in partnership with someone who has, $40,000 more in student loan debt than I have, or major credit card bills or something like that, I might choose not to marry that person because I do not want the legal and fiscal responsibility associated with their financial burdens. And so I choose to be in relationship with them, but not to make it a legal contract. Does anyone have thoughts or anything to share on any of what we've talked about so far? Do these ideas all make sense? Yes. Okay. So thinking about cohabitating specifically, there are some clear advantages and also some drawbacks. Compared to uninvolved individuals or people in relationships but not living together, cohabitants in committed relationships tend to report a general sense of well-being in that relationship and life satisfaction related to the relationship. Generally speaking, the longer a person waits to get married, the better the outcome for that marriage relationship tends to be. And so cohabitating effectively delays, the age at which you will marry your partner, which, has implications for positive outcomes for that relationship over time. Obviously, cohabitating allows for more intimate knowledge of yourself and your partner. So if you're living with someone, you already know that they leave the cabinet door half open every time they go through the kitchen, or that they compulsively make their bed every morning, and you have a sense of whether or not that's going to work for you in terms of living with that, day in and day out forevermore. And then the text points out that there's this idea of safety as it relates to cohabitating, that sometimes single females in particular, they might see themselves as being more safe living in a home with a male. But the text also points out that this could certainly also apply to like roommate situations. So, you're safer living with other people, generally speaking, as a deterrent against crime and assault and things like that than you would be living on your own. Personally, I doubt that that's an advantage that many people really consider when they're thinking about whether or not to move in with their boyfriend. And then clear disadvantages are basically compared to married spouses. We see more problems in cohabitating relationships than we see in married relationships of people living together, and also higher disillusion of the relationship. So that word disillusion just refers to the breakdown of the relationship. More often people break up and move on when they're cohabitating and not married than they do if they've made it a legal binding marriage contract. One partner might result in feeling used or duped, especially when expectations within the relationship differ. So, I said earlier that women tended to be more invested in these cohabitating relationships than men. And often that leads to problems in the relationship, right? Because women feel like it's something that it maybe isn't to the male partner. Parental problems. So if you do have a family of origin, that older generation that frowns upon this from a societal perspective, that can have implications for problems in the family, problems with parents. Some financial liabilities exist. So choosing to cohabitate rather than marry, sometimes I've said this already, doesn't qualify you for financial benefits and things that could be incurred from a married relationship. And then negative effects on children. So about 40% of children will spend some time in a home with cohabitating adults. And these children, because of the things I've just said, these children are more likely to experience the breakup of a parent's relationship compared to children in married homes. And this, can result in maladjustments for children. We often see more delinquent behavior in adolescence and more, risk-taking behavior and those types of things from children who have experienced parents breaking up. A term to be aware of when we think about the legal piece of cohabitation is common law marriage. Would someone be willing to unmute and give us a definition of what is a common law marriage?
If you live in the same house together long enough, then eventually the law will just consider you married.
Yes. If you live in the same household for long enough, and you have to most of the time present significant proof of that cohabitation. So sometimes it requires, shared finances or shared names on different legal things, bills and things like that. But if you can prove that you have cohabitated long enough, I know in North Carolina, it used to be 7 years. I'm not sure if that's still a law that stands, but it's recognized in 14 states that common law marriage is, a thing that exists for folks. So there's a term, I've said that alimony refers to the amount of money that a partner would be legally required to pay their spouse when the marriage dissolves. Palimony is kind of a coined term to refer to the amount of money that a partner in a common law marriage would have to pay to the other partner when their relationship dissolves. And it's based on, obviously, the term pals living together, but you do need to know what palimony means. So it's a play off the word alimony, same concept. And then just be aware that child support and things like inheritance and custody issues, these can all become, sort of significant issues in cohabitating relationships because the legalities are not as black and white as they are in married relationships. Okie doke. This last idea that we're going to touch on today is about this idea of living together apart. And I will take a minute just to show you on the course page for the async content for this week. You've got, it's a brief video from the perspective of a couple who are engaged in this type of relationship. They are, not married, but they're together in a committed long-term relationship, living in separate houses, seeing each other. I think they say only on the weekends. But I have asked you to watch that quick video and then reflect on, you can limit your reflection just to the video, or you can extend it to, any of the stuff that we've talked about today. But I want you to talk about 3 things that you learned from our chat or the reading or the video, 2 things you found particularly interesting, and then something that you still have questions about. So that will help you do some more thinking on these topics and issues. But as I said before, the idea of living together apart is something that is kind of trending. It's not a new phenomenon, but we are definitely seeing it happening more and more, where committed couples are living in separate spaces. We have a friend who met his wife in Portland, Oregon. She's from Japan. And in the last couple of months, due to some COVID stuff and just some other logistics, she is living in Japan. He's still living here. He had dinner at our house Sunday night, and she was here with us on FaceTime, so they're living together, but living apart, but still together in that, we were all she's a part of his social network. She's still doing the things that he's doing in a kind of a virtual way right now. But it's just what is working for them in this moment. He does have plans to relocate to Japan, so it's not a long-term thing. But for some people it is. It's the way they choose. And it's because of these reasons. Sometimes people need space and privacy, and this type of living arrangement affords that to them. They might also have like a career or, need a work from home space where they don't want to have a partner in the home. Sometimes people have variable sleep needs. My husband and I struggle with this. I am a night owl. I'm up until like just naturally up past midnight most every night. And he falls asleep at like 9 p.m. And so I have to be really quiet and kind of tiptoe around in the house, but I could clearly see how these different circadian rhythms could, present a need to have separate spaces. I used to babysit for a little girl who her dad worked as the ER night doctor. So he worked nights, he was out, and they actually had kind of a unique spin on this. They had a house with an attached guest space. And so he would use the guest house when he was like on an off schedule and needing to sleep during the day. But that's another example of how variable sleep needs might present the need for separate spaces, separate living arrangements. Allergies, different social needs. Some people are very extroverted, some people are very introverted and need to be home alone. Blended family needs. This is usually related to a previous marriage with children and connections to another family life. And kind of needing to maintain stability or whatever for your children. And then some people just think that it keeps the relationship more fresh, more exciting to only see one another, occasionally and not to spend all of your waking time or mundane time with another person. Cleanliness, as I said before, if you can't live with someone who leaves the cabinet doors half open or who compulsively makes their bed in the morning, this might be an arrangement that sort of serves you both. And then sometimes it's just related to like property and inheritance, those types of things. Does anyone have thoughts on this arrangement? You see how it would be beneficial and or detrimental?
No, but I do have a question. What's the difference between this and a long distance relationship?
Yeah, so sometimes living apart together is a long distance relationship, but you'll see in that video that I've posted that those folks are actually living in the same town. They get off work or on the weekends, they drive over to one another's home. So this does not have to have that distance component to it. This is just, it's, like from a more kind of functional standpoint that they've just chosen not to live together because of whatever reason.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else have ideas or thoughts on how this could either be beneficial or harmful to the relationship?
I didn't know if you could like see my hand or not, but like just
Sorry.
like put a raise. No, you're fine. I was just wondering like on like a children's aspect of it, like let's say they get together for one thing and then they like, realize like later on, like, oh, we're gonna have a child, but we're sticking to our, together but apart
Mhm.
kind of way. Like, how does that work for the child in terms of like travel? Like, let's say for like the Japan couple that like, let's say they meet up one day, just like, see each other on like sometime during the year or something like that. And somehow they get like a realization that, oh, we're going to be parents,
Yep.
but one person's so far away. Like, how does that look on the relationship? Like, can this then change into like we're not going to be together we're not going to be apart anymore. We're going to like strictly be together. Like, can that happen?
Oh, sure. Yeah. What do you guys think about that?
I think most times they'd probably want to live together. That would make sense.
Yeah, and I think probably, one of a couple actually of those theoretical frameworks that help us understand relationships, they look at that aspect of like shared roles and responsibilities in terms of cost and benefit. And, if I do this, if I'm the breadwinner, then the partner is staying at home, taking care of children. I'm just using that as an example to say that y'all, raising babies is hard work. And most people don't go out into the world trying to make things harder on themselves. And just from unless you might have a really strong support network where you have family members or community people that you can draw on. But for most of us in today's society, and that's another shift that we've experienced, is that most of us are living more removed from our families of origin. We have less of that social network. And so we need a partner who we can be like, you're going to be home tonight to keep the kids, right? So I can go do this other thing. And so I think just from a really basic, like functional standpoint, it would make it more challenging for sure to raise a child in that type of relationship. But I certainly think that could also, it could work. In the relationship that I mentioned with the child I babysat for, the dynamic there was very much like a tap in, tap out. Dad was sleeping during the day and then would tap in sometimes, and mom would be able to leave the home or go do something, work related in her office. But they rarely, because of the logistics of their work schedules, they rarely had a whole lot of together, all three of them, family time. It was kind of a primary caregiver one at a time. Not to say that it didn't happen, but yeah, I think it would just depend on the people and the desired outcome. I think it would be very important too for a child in that situation where they decided not to live together, to have, strong either technical connections, virtual connections to the other parent, or to spend lots of time as possible with both individuals separately, just to get what they need out of both of those parent relationships. Disadvantages are pretty straightforward. People in these living apart together scenarios tend to be less happy. And a lot of times because of those singleism ideas that I mentioned, they experience, stigmatization, stereotypes, and those type of things because they have chosen not to, live with their partner in kind of the normative societal way of being married or being in a long-term relationship with someone. There's obviously the cost factor, instead of paying one rent or one mortgage, you're paying two, which doesn't make a lot of sense from a fiscal perspective. It's inconvenient. So, you don't come home from work and have dinner with your spouse. You come home from work and drive over to your spouse's house to have dinner. That's like an extra layer of inconvenience. And then legal protection related to, shared property and things like that. And this idea of shared history. So, when certain things happen in my home or in my family, because I'm here connected with these people all the time, we all kind of have a shared experience around that. And you may not have the same sense of that in this type of living arrangement. All right. Thoughts, ideas? How does that work with same-sex relationships? I'm sorry, that was probably related. Madison, was your question related to something before this, or?
Yes, it was related to common law marriage.
Gotcha. That's a really good question, and I am not sure of the answer as to whether or not same-sex relationships are legally viewed in that same way. I will actually try to investigate that just because it's a curiosity to me now that you've asked the question.
Yeah, I've always wondered.
Yeah, does anyone know or have experience with that? And same sex. I'm going to look into that and maybe we can have some more conversation about it because that isn't a very good question. I don't want to make assumptions, but I would venture to say that the law probably does not recognize that in the same way, just because, same-sex marriages and things like that it's such a more recent acknowledgement in the law in general. But I don't know that for sure. Yep, so that's all I have. And if you will, before you hop off, please type your name into the chat so that I have record of you being here today. And then make sure that you have made a note. We will not have class next week on Tuesday. You have exam 1 during whatever hour you choose to take it. All right. As you're looking at your material and reviewing for the exam, let me know if you need clarification or have any questions. And otherwise, I will check in with you guys via email just to make sure you know what you've got going on next week. And I will see you the following Tuesday. Okay. Thank you. Take care.